Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. There are some podcast episodes that are just fun and easy to record, and then there are ones like this one, where the interview itself is a little tough, and then the intro and outro feels, for me personally on this one, it feels huge. It feels huge because I know when the podcast is going out. It feels huge because of watching the news today of what just happened in Beirut, Lebanon. It feels overwhelming in many ways, and it feels super important. And I know it's going to help yoga teachers who are having tough conversations with either their yoga colleagues, their friends, or their families. And that's why I'm so grateful for Rebecca for even having this idea to take this tough conversation that her and I had and turn it into a podcast. So grab a tea, maybe some popcorn, because this is a conversation that really wouldn't be on a podcast normally, but we both feel like even though it's a little uncomfortable, this is where big growth happens. This is where change happens. So if you are brand new here, this is a wild episode to start with, but hello and welcome. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers. This podcast is being recorded on the land of the Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga people. Also, it's now called the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. I'm a yoga teacher, a mom of three, an entrepreneur, and forever student who loves to ask questions. That's why I think podcasting is a good fit for me. I like that we get to hang out and learn together. And in that learning together, there are going to be mistakes along the way. There's going to be unlearning. There's going to be tough conversations like today's. And a long time ago, 7.5 years ago, I had this vision that you, the yoga teacher, would have a podcast that you could turn to because I really understand what it feels like to be out in the real world as a yoga teacher and to really want a place where you can connect to other yoga teachers, ideas, and information. So the goal was to have a place where you could feel supported between the work that you're doing and the life that you're leading. Returning listeners, thank you so much for hanging out again. You make this podcast possible. It's your questions, your thoughts, your conversations that really spark so much here on the podcast. Also, a huge shout out to today's sponsor, which is OfferingTree. Now, many of you already know that I use and love this software in my own business because it makes everything automatic and easy. Bookings happen, payments, Zoom links are sent out, reminders go out, and so much more once I create that initial offering. And we have a special podcast listener discount code for you over at OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Today's episode is also brought to you by my 20-hour Yoga for Pelvic Health training. This is an online training that is years of research and learning, all compacted into this pre-recorded. It was done live, so now it's just ready for you whenever you want to dive in. 20 hours of videos, and I like to combine like the practice and the theory. So you're doing yoga and feeling it in your body and then talking about the theory of why these are some great things to include in your class when you're focused on pelvic health or when you want to help students benefit their pelvic health. So if you want to learn how to weave this into your existing classes, even if you're not even talking about pelvic health, or maybe you really want to niche down and specialize and lead a workshop, a class, a series, all focused on pelvic health, this is the training to check out for sure. Go to theconnectedyogateacher.com, look under training. It's the 20-hour yoga for pelvic health. And if you get there and you're like, I'm just not sure, I don't know that I have 20 hours to invest right now. Well, we've also created a 3-hour training to get you started. It's also listed there. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com and look under training. Now let's get into today's chat with Rebecca Sebastian. Have you ever had a moment in your friendship where someone says something and it really sort of rubs you the wrong way? Or have you ever had a friendship struggle or end over a difference of opinions or a difference in values? Or have you ever felt the relief when a great friend wants to hear you out on why things are feeling off with something? And then when you both get to listening and reconnecting as humans, you realize that you have loads of similarities and connection, and you maybe learn something more about their views and why it's coming across in the way that it is. Today's podcast is sort of a mix of all of these things. And generally, I don't share tough conversations with friends like this on the podcast, but leave it to my very super brave friend, Rebecca Sebastian, to say, what if we talked about this on a podcast? We've had Rebecca on the podcast before 3 other times now. I was amazed when I looked back at this. And these were actually also tough conversations. But the difference was when these tough conversations started, we had talked about them ahead of time. We were more on the same page is what it felt like. Today's episode is more about like, what does it feel like when you're on the same journey, but you're on a different page? That's how it felt. So before we talked with Rebecca back in episode 312, we talked about how we stand with survivors, and Colin Hall was part of that episode as well. And we talked about, that was a nice moment when I forgot his name, Bikram coming to Canada, and he was actually stopped from coming to Canada to teach. And we highlighted how it's really important to stand with survivors, and we got right into it. It's a good episode to have a listen to if you're not sure. And if you've ever studied with Bikram or have thought about it, it's really one to have a listen to and educate yourself about for sure. In episode 304, Rebecca and I talked about our journey with thinking like, what are we still doing here? We've thought about quitting the yoga world. We've thought about quitting podcasting, and we're still both really in it. And then in episode 297, Rebecca talked to me about yoga philosophy and business. And so Rebecca never shies away from tough conversations. That's what I want to get across here. She's a longtime yoga teacher, 11-year yoga therapist. She owns an accessible and inclusivity-focused yoga studio and apothecary in Davenport, Iowa, called Sunlight Yoga and Apothecary. And Rebecca is the host of the Working in Yoga podcast. She's passionate about writing about yoga and participates and loves all things yoga and the yoga industry. She believes that through writing and communication, we can lift each other up and share what lights us up in the world. If you want to get nerdy about the yoga and wellness industry, chat about the best tea blends, and deconstruct everything that we thought we knew, Rebecca is the human to chat with. Also, another place Rebecca is digging into tough conversations very recently, is in a Facebook group for yoga therapists who are concerned about the recent changes by IAYT. I'll link to that in the show notes as well. I'm in there just to keep an eye on the conversation, and I have put it out to our connected yoga teachers. If you want to have more of a conversation about this on the podcast, or if you have questions, let me know. But definitely in the meantime, jump in that Facebook group. Again, I'll link to it in the show notes. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/382. We make sure that we take really detailed show notes for you so you can jump around, click on timestamps there and go to the topic that you want, and all of the links are there for you. And this is thanks to our amazing show notes writer, Crunch. Alrighty, let's dive into this tough conversation with Rebecca, Sebastian, and I. Also, I don't know how we're doing the intro now that I've just started the recording.
I mean, hey, everybody.
Like normally, here's how I do my recording. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Rebecca. It's so great to have you back.
Thank you. And welcome to Working in Yoga, Shannon. It's great to have you back. That covers everybody.
This is like when we've podcasted too much together and we just have this friend chat that we forget the details. Okay.
Dear listeners, this is not for you. This is our conversation.
To the listeners?
Yeah. You're just listening to our conversation today.
That's what it's going to be like. It's just going to be like a chat because I feel like we touched on some really great things. And I feel like you had this idea of Shannon, let's talk about this on a podcast. And I was like, yes. Now maybe you and I are both too eager to put it on a podcast. I don't think so. I think we learn a lot from private conversations through friends about tough things. Okay. So do you want to summarize kind of how we got here to having this tough conversation or our conversation the other day to catch people up?
Yeah, I mean, I'll do a little bit of an overview summary. And since you reached out to me, then you can do your summary as well. But I would think so. Essentially, to sum it up, friends, Shannon and I had a really amazing conversation last week. And it was just a delight to connect. And we hadn't connected for a while. And we were talking about hard topics. In this particular conversation, we were talking about the Palestinian genocide, but there are lots of hard topics that happen in our yoga spaces. And so I was, essentially at the end, I was like, I'm so proud of us. We should talk about what it is to have hard conversations in yoga spaces, because oftentimes those conversations do happen and you see either people, there's a lot of clustering of people who have like-minded beliefs together having those conversations, unwilling to talk to other people, or you have people in yoga spaces saying, I don't want to have that conversation at all. Yoga's not for this. And I disagree with both of those things. God, do I love a hard conversation. It allows me to get to know people who I love better. So you and I have one of those, and I thought, let's just talk about that. Your turn.
I love this. That was such a good summary. What would I add to it? Well, I think I would add to it and own up to this that I've been feeling pretty triggered by, I've been feeling triggered by the yoga world for a long time.
It's not to be triggered by, honestly. We really.
And this whole also learning about it. And then maybe a part of it is maybe I'm a little triggered by former Shannon, the yoga teacher, who knew nothing about cultural appropriation and all the things that sort of Western yoga has done to that's pretty harmful, can be harmful. Toxic positivity, just saying don't even look at the news, just sit here and meditate. Yeah, there are a lot of things that kind of get under my skin. And then I feel like I was feeling triggered, or maybe I was feeling I was questioning. I was like, Rebecca's on the same page as me with social justice. I know that we have sat physically in spaces where you and I are talking about cultural appropriation and the yoga world. And I'm like, yes, yes. And that sense of community. And then all of a sudden, maybe it was gosh, maybe I trusted in this sense of community and it's not what I thought it was. And so I feel like I was reactive in a message to you. And blah, blah, blah.
And honestly, and one thing, this is something that I think I love about being in my 40s, is to have enough knowledge to be able to go back and say, oh yeah, I messed up in a message. You and I had gone back and forth, and gosh, what was this, December, probably November, December time, we'd been going back and forth about something. And you typically do voice messages, which I love because I love your voice, right? It's just incredible. And I am not that person. I am almost always the person who types out. And I thought after we got off this phone call last week, of course I said some stupid shit while I was talking instead of typing, because I oftentimes am thinking in a writer's mind. And I was like, I said some stupid shit and it was dumb. It was a comment that was dumb and it was not appropriate for the situation. And like, you were correct to be like, oh, I don't know how to take that. And then we kind of separated for a while. Like you and I haven't communicated for probably 6 months, which is unlike us. We generally are pretty chatty together. And then you commented on one of my, Instagram stories about Trello, because of course Trello brings us together. This podcast is not sponsored by Trello, but and we started chatting again. Yeah.
Yeah. And gosh, I'm so grateful for the chat and also the safety of knowing that I could reach out to you and I said, "Hey, can we have a chat?" Cuz I was like, this has gone on long enough. Like I'm just stewing with like whatever, and I have more questions than answers with like what happened, how did we get here? What are your thoughts? And the minute we started talking, I was like, "Oh, I realized that like I brought some baggage from other conversations where people were like saying very harmful things. And I brought that with me into this thinking, okay, maybe Rebecca is feeling the same way as these other people. And I was wrong about it. Like my guess of like how you were feeling about it was wrong.
Well, I mean, first of all, here's what I want to say to you is that can we give like former Shannon a ton of grace here? Like, look, former Rebecca has also done some weird stuff. like she's been in marriages that weren't good. She has said some out of pocket stuff in her time. And for those of us who feel passionately about things, especially in this space, we're going to talk about social justice things, but things in general, like, I mean, people are really passionate about Young Living essential oils too. Like you can say like really out of pocket things when you're passionate about something. And then you learn later on, like, oh, I should have caught a bubble there and maybe step back a little bit. Like, let's give you like a ton of grace and hopefully we can extend that to both of us because yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that I think is the basis of any difficult conversation is like, we're going to assume the best about the other person.
Yes. Oh gosh, and I hope our listeners also extend this to themselves. And I'm telling
Yeah.
you, like it felt so good during the conversation from my side. I can say like I was just like, first of all, let's focus on connecting. Like, how are you? What have you been up to? Like, let's connect as friends. Like, what's going on in your life? That felt really good. And then being like, okay, can we can we chat about this thing? Like, here's how I was feeling. Like to dive right in. And then finishing and being like, okay, we are on the same page. That doesn't mean that we're going to agree about every single thing. You know,
No,
what if
probably
we didn't
not.
agree on Trello? That'd be something. But
Well, then we're done. Sorry, it's you, not me. Trello's amazing.
and so, yeah. And I'm hoping, okay, so let's dive into this in terms of,
Perfect.
you know, there are a lot of yoga teachers right now having tough conversations. So let's just think back to why. Climate change, the pandemic, the US election. I don't care if you don't live in the US, it's coming for you on your news cycle. Like so many things are coming at us. The genocide happening right now to Palestinians, anti-Semitism. We just had a huge wave of anti-Semitism here in Canada over the last week, hit the news cycle. Like I realize it's there all the time. Racism, sexism, abortion rights, like holy.
Yes. Yes. All of it. Here's what I think was one of the things that, whether or not we said this in this way last week, we started talking specifically about the genocide in Palestine. And I'm thinking if it's okay if we go there and talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you wondering what my stance was on that, or if you and I were aligned in this, and we are aligned. It's genocide going on in Palestine. It's really shitty, and I feel like it's very weird that I have to say I'm anti-kids dying, because who the hell is not anti-kids dying? Like, we don't have to cover that, but really, that's bad. Boo. We should not be pro that. Right? Yeah. But we started talking about that specific thing, and that's something that you're really passionate about, Shannon, and you shared so much on your podcast, and you're so generous with information on Instagram following that. And so we got into it and we were talking about it. But that also is, you're right, true of the environment and cultural appropriation and racism and misogyny and homophobia and all the things.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of difficult conversations we could be having. Okay, so does this belong in yoga?
Of course it belongs in yoga. So stop. So stop.
I know your answer on this already.
Okay. Yes. I'm going to say yes and. Yes, and I wanna talk about some parameters that you and I probably took for granted because A, we know each other pretty well, and B, not only do we know each other pretty well, I'm just gonna speak for myself, but I like genuinely like you as a person. So I'm in on this, like, in my head, I define people as friends or friendly. And if you're a friend, my job is to lean into our relationship before all the other things in life that would be self-serving, right? Like, I value our connection before I would value, like, what's good for my podcast or what's good for this or that. Like, you're my friend. I want to be your friend. Friendly people don't hold the same sort of gravitas, right? Like, we can be friendly, but I'm going to be like, it's just business, babe. I'm going to do whatever for my business. I would consider you and I to have a friend connection. And I don't want to take that for granted because it is easier to dive deep, I think, in somebody who has like a relationship with you and your friends, you know? Like, would you agree? Maybe you think I'm off base, but
Oh, I love that. And so you're saying like that impacted our conversation.
yeah, absolutely. So if you want to have hard conversations, I think we almost shy away from the conversations with friends, and we're just going to like, spout things to people we only kind of know a little bit. But gosh, like, don't you want to get in it with the people who like you really trust and love and have respect and all those things? Like, I've decided now, 45-year-old Rebecca has decided the rest of my life, all I'm in for is to know other people and to have them know me. And that means like, I want to have those hard conversations with people who I like and respect. And I think they're interesting and funny and have a soothing voice like you, Shannon.
Okay, I really understand this. And I appreciate you saying this because you're right. Though the friendships that I have where I'm like, hey, this thing is making me feel weird, or like, I need some support in this, or sorry, I really messed up. Those moments, even though it's really uncomfortable, where you're like, ooh, now I have to admit like how I'm not perfect, which none of us are, or this feels weird or whatever, or you just have this like humanness moment. After those conversations, you're like, wow, our friendship is way stronger. But on the
Yeah.
flip side of it, when it starts to go sideways, it also can mean the end of a friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. But okay, so the yoga thing, right? Aren't we in it to deeply know ourselves? And part of that is that deep connection that we have with other humans around. Like, we don't live in ashrams. Like, I don't. I have kids. I've got stuff to do. I have a job. I like employ people. Isn't that part of this, is to deeply know ourselves, and as a result we get to then also deeply know other people? That's at least my thing.
Right. For me, when I look at yoga, I just feel like the philosophy of yoga, there is social justice weaved all the way through anything I've ever learned. Like once, just like basic ahimsa. Okay. If I
Yeah.
say something and it's harming someone else, my choice of words, uh, I want to learn to do better. Like that's a basic one. Yeah. And I feel like so much social justice is in that, let's not hurt other people.
So if we're in yoga spaces and we're talking with other people who are yoga practitioners about like these hard topics, can we say the first step is to lean into relationships that are the strongest in those spaces? Like talk to your yoga friends first, connect with them. And I think one of the best things about being able to have hard conversations with friends is that if you truly have like a respect, friendship connection, like the stakes feel a little bit lower because you're going to hopefully that is reciprocal and going both ways. You can practice having hard conversations with people who you know are going to be still in relationship with you at the end of those hard conversations. Like practice with your friends.
Right. That's a really good tip. Okay. Now, what if we're like, well, I just want to show up and teach yoga and not I don't want to talk about politics in my yoga class. I
Good
get that
question.
view.
Yeah. Cause like, I also feel like that has to be okay to some degree. that
Yeah.
has to be okay.
Because you're not showing up to like, if I decided, okay, climate change is really on my mind today. And
Yeah.
then I instead just threw out my class plan and was like, today we're going to have a lecture on climate change. Like my students would not be happy about it.
No. And let's get into so this is the one thing that I wanted to talk about this in our conversation, the thing I was like texting you, because I think that's also something that happened in our conversation unconsciously. Like we both consented to it. So can we talk about what people consent to in yoga spaces to have conversations? Like if you as a student go to a yoga class and the expectation is that your teacher is going to have that conversation or your co-students are going to have that conversation, can we talk about the fact that in order to have conversations that are difficult, all parties should consent to that conversation?
Yes. I love that you sent this to me. You were like, "Can we talk about consent?" And I was like, "For sure we can." And I don't have the answers on this because let me think of an example of like where well, I can think of an example that I shared with you earlier where I was in a class where the teacher was like, "Nobody should ever eat bacon." And I was like, "What kind of a class am I in?" Like, I don't wanna hear someone's nutritional guidance for me, especially someone
Yeah.
who's not trained, um, in a class. This should not be happening. So I would say, like, I did not give consent for, like, nutritional guidance. But also, I've had a student, or I know of a yoga teacher who had a student who someone said something really rude in class and they were asked to leave the studio. And like, maybe everyone in that class didn't consent to hearing the teacher speak up and like take action right away and give a little like, here's why this is not okay. Yeah.
There's the question, right? So what do we consent to in discussion? Because I love your bacon example. That's a good one. The example I always use is your lecture on the environment because I remember I was in my 20s and I signed up for handstand workshop in like this yoga conference situation and it was like a husband and wife team. I don't even think they teach in the yoga space anymore. And they were teaching handstands, but the first 25 minutes of a 90-minute workshop was spent lecturing people about the environment.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
just, yeah, it was very much like we feel like you've got to have a connection to the earth. And then, so they're in the Midwest of the United States. And these are two teachers from California. And they're like, we're out surfing, connecting with the ocean every day. And I was like, Jesus, stop. Like, I thought we were doing handstands. Like,
Was their handstand better because of that connection to the other? Oh my gosh. Sorry. That's just me being sarcastic.
I mean, and I remember that is always my example in this. Now, I actually am a passionate environmental advocate.
Me
Like we
too.
do a lot in our space to support environmental causes in our area, but do our students consent to that? when they come into our classrooms? And further, do they consent to conversations about race? Do they consent to conversations about misogyny? Do they consent to conversations about all the hard Palestine? Do they consent to those conversations? And is there a point where there's a subject matter that the stakes are so high, consent doesn't matter? I don't know. But
Yeah.
maybe? I don't know.
That's a really good question. I don't have the answers for that. I do think consent comes in. We know that with hands-on assists. It's making me think, and I told you this example on the phone, and for your listeners who don't know or mine who haven't heard the episode, there's a yoga student, Suzanne, who it was kind of the flip of like this. It wasn't the teacher. Suzanne went into a yoga space. The teacher was like, "Hey, how are you?" And Suzanne had just been watching how people in Gaza have no water. And this was before the class, it wasn't in the class. And she said, "I'm having a really tough time today. I just watched all these people like just needing basic water. And I'm looking around and I see water bottles everywhere. And I know that I have access to unlimited water if I want it. And like, I feel terrible about this." And the yoga teacher completely dismissed her, like didn't respond to it. And Suzanne shared so well on the podcast what that felt like as the student. So maybe we're skipping over this isn't really well, I'm sure the yoga teacher didn't like the consent wasn't there of like
Yeah.
someone's going to come up to me and start talking to me about like Palestinians, you know.
What would you have done if you were her teacher and Palestine was either a subject that you didn't know a lot about or you didn't want to talk about? Is there
Uh
what you would have answered
yeah,
differently?
I definitely hopefully depending on what the topic well for that I feel strongly that like people want to be heard. Like I would be like,
Yeah.
"I'm so sorry that today is feeling so difficult." Like I hope coming to yoga offers some comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah, cuz sometimes we don't know what to say. Like I had someone come to my yoga class and say like, "My baby just died." And you better be ready to hold space for someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we've all had those. If you're in this industry long enough, if you've done this job long enough, that will happen to you at some point or another. Someone will come in feeling big feelings about whatever.
Mhm.
And is it almost because here's my question to you. So in Suzanne's example,
Mhm.
she was talking about Palestine, which is also a topic that right now feels a little bit divisive. So as a yoga teacher, would we hold space for that? How do we hold space for difficult conversations if we don't want to be in them?
Right. Yeah, like if someone came out to me and they were going on like this didn't happen in a yoga space, but it was a professional who was like saying that the military is coming to round all people up. I don't share that same view. I guess if someone came up to me and I was holding space in a yoga class and they were saying like I'm terrified that the military is coming to round us up and I didn't agree with that, or I was like just don't really I got to get the class going here. um
Yeah.
then I think I would say to them, like, same thing. I can hear how afraid you are, and I'm sorry that you're feeling that way, and hopefully, like, let me know if there's something that will help you feel more comfortable in today's class. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I think both examples that you gave when you were like our pretend yoga teacher, like you did something really important, and that is you validated the person in front of you. So, like, you don't have to consent. I don't believe that even as a yoga teacher, you have to consent to every conversation that anybody wants to have. I don't believe that to be true because there can be things going on with your yoga teacher that you don't even know about. Like, look, they could be doing all the stuff, right? They could have had a parent that died, or they're moving, or, whatever thing that you don't know, that they're professional enough to not bring to class, right? Thank you for not bringing your stuff to class. But also somebody comes in with a deep, heavy, hard conversation. You're like, okay, this is just not for me today.
Right.
Like, this is not the kind of space that I can hold today. You can still validate someone's feelings. You can still say, hey, how you feel is valid, because yeah, it is.
You did this really well in our conversation when I was telling you, I was like, look, I feel like I started to wonder where you stood on this because you weren't posting on social media. And then I said, and there were some conversations that I had where people let me know, oh yeah, because I have Jewish friends, I have to stand with them. Or, I mean, one person told me flat out, I don't care about Palestinians. And I was like, and so you held space for me. Like when I was sharing those feelings with you, you were like, I am so sorry you had that experience, Shannon. Like I remember that from our conversation. Um, and that's really like what it comes down to, is just like to feel heard and feel like, okay, I don't care about not that you don't care, but all the details are one thing, but you really care how I'm feeling in that moment.
Yeah. Well, of course. I mean, of course I do. And I also think that that's something that we as yoga pros can do pretty easily for other people, even if it's a subject that maybe doesn't touch our hearts as deeply as it touches somebody else's heart. I mean, there are lines though. I mean, so you said this thing when you were like, a teacher said, I don't care about Palestinians, right? I don't care that they're dying, etc. Immediately my brain's like, oh, your moral compass and my moral compass don't have the same true north. So, I mean, here's the hard question then. All right, but now I'm going to care a little bit less about your feelings,
Right.
you
And
know?
for me, it was like, okay, now I don't feel safe with that person because
Sure.
to me, it felt like certain people, based on skin color and religion, probably have a higher priority for this person, which means to me that my Muslim friends, my friends of color, my gay friends, my whoever might also, my my loved ones might become the target of this. There are people that are more worthy in the world. I was like, where I don't all the ground kind of slipped out from under me in terms of, and I love how you said the moral compass.
Yeah. So, okay. This is because my yoga space, because for those of you that don't know, I'm in the United States Midwest in Iowa. I hold a yoga studio. I own a yoga studio. I have 15 employees. We have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of members. And I purposely hold space for hard conversations within my facility, right? Um, there is a baseline. And the frank truth is, I'm never conversations that are arguing baseline are not conversations that are welcome. So if we want to talk about race, yes. But if you want to talk about the value of a human life based on the color of people's skins, that is off baseline. We are all valued. If you want to talk about the value of a human life or human contributions based on gender identity or sexuality, that's off baseline. Look, we are all valid. We are all equal. We are all equally have the same rights to healthcare and human rights and to be literally alive. That's baseline. I'm not arguing with that, because me arguing with that acts like that's something worth arguing about. And it's not. You're just wrong.
Right.
like,
Right.
there's a lot of things I'm willing to work and say, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I could be wrong about this, but if you want to tell me that somebody's life has more or less value based on what religion they have, you're fucking wrong. Like, that's off baseline, and I'm not ready to argue with it because that acts like you have a point. Surprise, surprise, you don't.
Yeah. Well, and I also want to say to our listeners who maybe don't know you is that you're not only willing to have these these difficult conversations, uncomfortable conversations in your yoga space, you will willingly do it here in a podcast or up on a
Yeah,
stage.
yeah, anywhere. Yeah.
And so that's where I was like, I felt this like, and can you be super honest with me and please do that?
Sure.
Like, is there some way that I'm coming across? Because I am like, here's what happens in my brain. I go have a warm shower and I think like people in Gaza can't. I go to do something with my kids, like have them over for dinner, and I'm like, I know that they're all like going to be tucked in safely to bed. My kids are all adults, but like
Yeah.
they're going to have safety, and mothers in Gaza don't feel that for their children right now. Like I can leave the country. I can
Yeah.
move around in my car and not hit a checkpoint. Like this is how my brain works. And so and I feel like two things. One, I feel like this is a normal reaction to watching a genocide. What my brain can only compare to the Holocaust without having lived it, but just having learned it and read about it and listened to people talk about it. And apartheid, genocide, the Holocaust, and colonization, all of these things. And for me, I feel like this level of passion needs to happen across all people who care about other people. And so I come across like that. And I do it everywhere. I'm doing it like whether I go talking to a family member or friends, if I'm talking to my local politician, if I'm on the podcast, I'll watch something upsetting and I start the podcast. I do it. I do it everywhere right now. And there is a part of me that's like, Shannon, could you make this more palatable for people who it's too much for them? Like, can you be honest? Is there a way that like I should be doing it?
Okay. No. Because I think one of my favorite parts about our conversation last week sort of surrounded this idea because you are coming across incredibly passionate, but also I know you as a person and I know that you're incredibly passionate about things. Like you're a passionate person. That's who you are. I think the tension, right, that happens with other people happens when they don't have the same passion as you do. They recognize it. That brings discomfort. And in order to offset this discomfort that they're experiencing, they're either lashing out at you or deciding they don't care about an issue.
Okay.
So I think what is an interesting thing to explore is another way for people to channel discomfort because not everybody has the same level of passion as you do about the subject, but also validate that there are different ways that we can show up, and each way that you can show up is valid. When I see big picture things happening across the world, halfway across the world, which is where Palestine is from where I am, that makes me feel like I can't do anything. So, what I have learned is that I will double down on the things that I can do. So, we've got my studio is called Sunlight. We have Sunlight and service projects. We've picked up an extra service project for the fall. I've picked up an extra book club where we can sit around and discuss a difficult book and we can have those conversations amongst ourselves because that's how I offset the suffering and discomfort that I feel because I can't do anything. And I think that the conversations that I'm interested in having are how people can take that discomfort that they experience when they're like, God, Shannon knows so much. And Shannon is so passionate about it. I don't feel that passion. And if I don't feel your level of passion, I'm wrong. And I think that's where shame, guilt, all of those feelings come in. People are experiencing that from your content. And to some degree, that's really not about you. That's about them and their feelings. Like, I'm sorry you feel the way you feel, but this is how I feel. And I'm also not afraid to share it.
This is so good to listen to. Thank you. Because I feel like I do think, is there a better way to do this? Is there a better way to and I love, just so our listeners know, I also know the work that you do, that you support all kinds of community things there and all kinds of social justice projects in your own community, taking care of community. And I love that. And I really think that's the only answer for all of us to do. That's up to all of us. Not that it's the only thing we can do, but collective care is where we're going to have to be.
Yeah, I agree.
We know that we can't look to our governments from right now and be like, can you please fix this thing? Right now, even in Canada, that even though we have free healthcare, we can't always look at our healthcare system and be like, here's what I need from you. We have to self-advocate, and then we also have to care for each other as well.
Yeah.
There are many systems that are struggling right now. So I guess I'm still sitting with, and I'm still going to ask myself, because I think I need to continue to do so. Is there a way to share about this that doesn't automatically make someone be like, I'm shutting this down? Because I had a friend who told me, Shannon, I'm worried about you. I think if you just shut the news off and go meditate, it's going to be easier.
Ooh, that's a tough. That gives me feelings, Shannon.
But you know what I mean is because this friend cares about me, I realize that they care about me. I'm not open to listening to that right now. It doesn't help. It didn't help. That's why you have feelings about it, because, if you came to me and you were super passionate about hey, Shannon, we got to feed these hungry people in my community. And here's what we're doing at the yoga studio. And can you help raise awareness? I'd be like, I'd either say 100%, or I really want to, but I don't know where I can fit this in. I wouldn't be like, what would be easier is if you just go cook yourself a nice meal.
Oh, yeah, like trying to not make awkward podcast sounds. But I mean, so yoga and meditation, yoga asana, let's call it yoga asana, is what it is. Asana and meditation have a place in regulating our nervous systems. And there is no group of people where the stakes are higher than people who are involved in social justice work at regulating our nervous systems. Because frankly, the truth is, this is a long fight. Everything's a long fight. You are only playing a long game. And while it is really nice to connect with people online and find people who believe the same thing that you believe, and then you get all those serotonin bursts of oh my God, so-and-so believes what I believe, and oh my God, I love this, and we have this new community, like all the dopamine hits that you get when you're online and you're connecting in that way. Every change is a long game. It is always a long game. So I love the idea of using asana and meditation to regulate your nervous systems, but that is not the solution for your discomfort and suffering at recognizing systemic injustice. You can't meditate your way out of that.
Yeah.
You can't. And that's not useful to think that you can.
Right. That was so well said.
Thanks.
Hey, Connected Yoga Teachers, I want to pop in here for a moment and talk to you about what it's like to create an offering and then put it out into the world, and how this can be so much easier when you're using OfferingTree. So OfferingTree is an all-in-one system, and you can customize it for your own business. It's very customizable now, beyond what I ever envisioned that it would be. Or it can be as simple and as plain as you would like it to be also. What I love about OfferingTree, whether you have an existing website now or you use their website platform, which is really the easiest one and the most reasonably priced that I've found, the moment you go to create an offering, it's going to ask you all of the things that you maybe are forgetting. Like not only like what day is it, what time is it, but how would you like to take payments for that? Are you going to take online payments? It will set that all up for you. And then the tiniest details, like do you want a reminder going out? Is there a Zoom link to send out to people? Do you want to send out a text reminder to someone? Do you want them to sign a waiver? What I love when I create an offering on OfferingTree is that all of the questions are there. I don't really have to think about it. I just fill out the information and then it's there and ready on my website. And I have to tell you, connected yoga teachers, it's a really interesting thing. I'll work with someone. I used to build websites for yoga teachers. I have done consultation calls with yoga teachers. I've talked about marketing, all the business things. And kind of there's this step of like, get the thing that you offer up on a website and get talking about it. Don't worry about like 25 blog posts yet. Make sure that your offering is up there and ready to go. If you are looking for a booking software or a website or a way to send out emails or reminders or Zoom links or take payments, we have a special podcast listener discount code for you over at OfferingTree.com/Shannon. That's OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Alrighty, let's get back into today's episode with Rebecca Sebastian. Okay, I'm going to jump around a little bit more because I just remembered one other part of our conversation. And that was where I was like, basically saying to you, like, where do you stand on this? And you were like, of course I'm against genocide. Like, who is questioning that? And I was like, okay, this is coming from like me not seeing you post about it on social media, but I thought that, but I wasn't sure. Can we chat
And
about
let's get
that?
into that. Let's get into that. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because I think you and I also have where we diverge is social media, right?
Yes.
Like I think this is where we're off. We are completely in lockstep, right? Because I think in pretty much everything else, we are in lockstep about how we believe about this. But social media to me is my work. It is my job. And I don't post about every social justice issue because I A, I don't believe that I have to. B, I don't believe that I'm accountable to people on social media for them to know how I feel about everything always, all the time. Social media is not the cops. And I also know that I show up for the work in my own community, and that's my priority. I hear and understand, and I totally want to validate all those people listening who are like, I don't know how to show up any other way but on social media. Like, there's also worth and value in that kind of work too. Like what you're doing, you're always like, especially when we were in the thick of really understanding what was happening in Gaza, one thing I appreciated about your social content was like, you were editing, you were like, I don't know why I was following this person. I don't follow this person anymore. Here's where I'm getting the news. Here's where I'm getting my information, because we live in an age of information overwhelm, right? There's so much out there. And one thing I thought you were doing so well is figuring out where to get the information from, because I wasn't going to do that. So I was just watching you.
It's interesting you say that. I want to say that there were a lot of people who then would reach out to me and be like, I had no idea this was happening. And I was thinking, wow, how? Like, but I guess most of their accounts that they follow don't share. And then people are like, where can I learn more?
Right.
And so I kept getting this validation that like me sharing on social media it's making a difference.
Sure.
So that I'm like, why isn't everyone doing this? Which I'm saying that in a sarcastic tone because social media also drains me and makes me tired and it's fake. Anyway, you and I have talked about that before.
I think it's a trick of the light. So to me, social media makes you believe you've done something, when what I know based on not only my own experiences, but like having close friendships with people who are activists in my own community and other communities, is that the hard work is the grant writing. The hard work is like showing up when there's not protesters there. The hard work is figuring out who's going to clean up the mess after the protests. The hard work is going, okay, so we protested Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday until Sunday afternoon. The hard work is Monday morning, when you still have to show up and still have, when you don't have 1,000 people behind you or even 50 people behind you, and you have to be like, what are the permits for the next protest? And also, did that protest impact the things that I wanted it to impact? And if it didn't, how can I create the impact and change that I want to? Is my time well spent protesting, or is my time better spent figuring out how to feed refugees that are coming here from other countries because they have no access to housing and food stamps and all the things that are getting them fed and sheltered? Like, that's the hard work. And I think social media sometimes tricks us into thinking we've done more than we've done. That being said, there's a space on social media for skillful information sharing. And from my view, you slide into that space.
I appreciate you saying that. Because there was a time also where I was like, oh, wow, I'm tipping over into like, I was sharing pretty gruesome videos because I was like, if people saw this, then they would. And then I started to be like, if you can handle it today, you can go over and see this person's story. Like it still is important that we bear witness to some degree, that we know what's happening.
Yeah.
Mm.
Will
Oh,
you tell me a little bit about your thoughts about social media? Like what your experience has been like over these last, several months since October 7th, 2023. What's your experience been like?
Okay, well, I'll tell you one thing that happens when I'm scrolling, and a lot of my feed is full of like what is happening in Palestine, but also other social justice issues. And that's, I'm gonna blame, not actually blame, but blame the different trainings that I was in and the different spaces I was in where people are like, follow more people of color, follow more like queer creators, like listen to more yoga teachers talking about fat phobia. So I like, this is the circle I'm in, and I'm so grateful to these educators and to the people who are like me trying to figure it out. And then it's so bizarre when like there's something huge that happens in the news, like a massacre, let's say, and it's all children, and that's what's mostly in my feed. And then there is a yoga offering where it's like, come to this retreat where like you'll leave all your worries behind and da 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 da. And I'm just like, I just take this pause and I'm like, has this yoga teacher said anything about any social justice issue? And if not, I feel triggered. I feel like it's not actually yoga. And that's on me, like, and whatever. I can unfollow, and other people might be like, I'm going to follow them because that's what I want. I want my feed filled up with like, I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about social media because I feel like it's been amazing right now for getting information out really quickly. It's terrible how people are being shadow banned. Like a friend tried to share a story with me yesterday and she couldn't, and I couldn't see it in her stories. And I've seen things where like there's no sound. It's the more people have been speaking up about Palestine, the more there's this like, we're not going to let you get your information through. The other thing I'm seeing is that the yoga teachers and yoga students who are in this conversation where Palestine is really important, and also so is like taking care of the earth and taking care of like trying to get out of these really oppressive systems that we've built up as humans. They care about this a lot. Like they want to go to a company now that's selling socks or yoga or whatever and see the values of that company.
Yeah.
So I think the world is changing. We had Tristan Katz and Brooke Monahan on the podcast talking about like marketing is totally different now. We don't know what we're doing anymore.
Yeah. I like Tristan. They're great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's something that I really want your thoughts on, because this is something, again, within my little community space, and a lot of us go into bigger community spaces, myself included, but I'm not the only one on my team that's like that. We talk about the shame that we hand each other in the social justice space. Like, you're not doing enough. You can't be in it. And I think social media feeds that. I feel like there's got to be a sweet spot. And I'm thinking there's a couple people that are names, big names in the yoga space, where I now look at those people's content and I'm like, you're doing as much harm as you're doing good. Because if what you're doing is marketing shame, but your shame is wrapped in a social justice blanket versus a diet culture blanket, say, like, it's still shame peddling. And I think we have to talk about how that happens in social justice spaces. If you're not showing up in the right way, if you're not showing up enough, if you're not doing the things that you're doing, it's why I have personally been like, look, I have so many fucks to give about the things that are important to me, but the social media space, I didn't grow that garden of fucks this year. Like I'm not got it for you. Like, it's a choice I've made. Like, I can't care about everything. I can't. Otherwise, I'm not going to show up for the things that matter to me. Can we talk about like this handing shame in the social justice space a little bit? Because it happens. And I feel like we all feel it.
It happens. And also, like, I don't know what else to call it other than like infighting. Like, happens really quickly. I mean, we're humans. We brush up against. We're like, also when you're in social justice spaces, people are feeling like right now, like rage and grief. Like, I just watched this video that wrapped up all the climate for the last month. Like, after that video, I was like we're doomed. Like, that's how it feels, you know? So we have like big feelings going on, and then we're in these spaces, and I've witnessed it. I've been in conversations where I'm like, wait, we're going in the same direction. Why are we wasting our energy here arguing about like the color of this pamphlet or something? Like,
we're all in the same car.
Right?
The same goddamn car.
Okay, you said this quote. I don't know if it was on your podcast. Was it someone you interviewed? It's the quote about difference of opinion.
Yeah. So it's Daniel Simpson. Shout out to Daniel. He's a yoga pro in the UK. He has his own podcast. Google him. It's great. Daniel said, on my podcast when we were talking about perfectionism, he said, oh yeah, your worst enemy is a person who almost thinks like you.
Right.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's really true. Because actually, as I was having this, conversation around perfectionism in my podcast in January, February, I was asking about social justice issues too, because I think that affects it. Like, we feel like we have to be the perfect activists, or what we do is invalid. And he's like, yeah, because we're so busy fighting with that person who's almost like us, that we've like lost the plot, y'all. Like,
right. Oh my gosh, it's so true. And that's a waste of energy. And that shame piece, I get that. So like you said two things in that are making me think, and this will sit with me, is like, you said that you were looking at my social media and being like, this is good. I feel like I'm like getting information here. But there were times where I was just like, if I can shame everyone into like, sometimes that works. Yeah. I remember being in a relationship with someone once and they were like, Shannon, don't do whatever recycling thing it was or organic garden thing. And there was a bit of shame to it. Like, I was like learning and feeling shame. Like, why didn't I know that thing? Gosh, I'm going to do better. I want to do better. I think that was shame.
So, and again, I mean, we can all choose based on whatever our moral compass and value system are, but I don't care what it is. There's no change in the world that's worth me dishing shame to other people. Shame kills somebody else slowly.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's not how I want to make my money in my business. It's not how I want to get change to happen. Like, it's just not, because to me, if the only way change happens is through shame and shaming other people, that change is unsustainable.
What do you think is like super effective? Like if you and I were sitting in Gaza right now as parents raising kids, what would you want people to be doing?
Ooh, that's a good question. What I could almost answer more easily what I wouldn't want people to be doing, and what I would not want people to be doing is for white people to fight with other white people about what you should be buying from whatever small business because they do or don't believe what you believe about Gaza or Palestine. Because I'm just going to say it, I feel like you've lost the plot if that's what we're doing here. What I want, what I would want was for people to sign up for the hard stuff. What I would want was for people to sign up for figuring out how to write grants and advocate for your government and go all the way up to the top and then work your way backwards. Like, so maybe I can't affect the US presidential election, but I can affect the people who represent me in government in my local area. Because I think that, gosh, like, I love big moments of sexy change, but that's not how it works. It's just never how it works. It is the form that you have to fill out on Monday morning. It is the people in your community who feel safe enough with you to have hard conversations that they can work out how they feel about something. I mean, like, we have to be in it for discomfort and the hard stuff. And you have to be in for social change when you don't get a dopamine hit from what you're doing or saying, when you don't feel self-righteous because you've said something and you're like, I feel really great about that. And I check that in myself because I'll say stuff online or I'll say stuff in my podcast or I'll be writing stuff. And it's like, I'm now like checking for that self-righteous feeling because I also don't want to feel that way either. I just want to be in it for the hard stuff because hard stuff, it doesn't look nice. It is like beige in color. It's like Times New Roman font 11 sexy. It is not sexy, but it is how change happens. Advocate for your government and advocate for your government even when somebody's not telling you to do it. Like, there you go. And join a community of other people who are going to do that hard work too.
Yeah. The protests in my area was one of the things that like I saw really helping me feel like, oh, I don't have to explain myself to these people. These people
Yeah.
also wake up thinking about the children of Gaza, or like it's on their mind all the time. And we found ways, like we went to a barbecue for our local politician who kept ignoring our emails or sending really weird responses back. And we held a small vigil outside the barbecue. And a few people who were attending the barbecue came up to our group at the end and said, this made a great impact. You really got your message across in a very peaceful, profound way. Like,
Yeah.
phew.
So I also am really, I just want to talk about the protest for a second because I think that protesting is really important, but there's a both and here is that peaceful protests where you are not leaving garbage everywhere because like I really want to talk about the efficacy of protesting and how actually a lot of protesting that happened around Gaza is around what, and there is a Harvard professor, I will look up his name, who talks about what are called luxury values. And it is the values of primarily upper middle class white people for things like defund the police and protesting, pro-Palestinian protesting, who then go to protest and leave garbage everywhere for poor brown folks to have to clean up, while simultaneously also saying they're advocating for those people. And so I feel like that's also something I'm on the lookout for if what I believe is a luxury value or if I'm treating it like it's a luxury value versus something that I'm truly passionate about and I want to advocate for having change about.
Yeah. Just to be clear, our protests are usually like 30 to 50 people. And there's
You're
definitely
seeing
no
this on-
garbage. The only thing we
Yeah.
left were flowers at our vigil. But I can see how a massive protest would create that.
Those college campuses, that was what they left garbage in their wake. But also they did at Standing Rock too, when they were up protesting for clean water at Standing Rock. The amount of garbage that was left there after Standing Rock is just, I mean, it might as well have, like Burning Man cleans up better, y'all. Like,
Now, for me in that moment, then I feel like, okay, these are people who, like, because we're talking about massive protests and the student protests, like they protested for Vietnam, which, was really valid. And now, like reflecting back and knowing the history of the war in Vietnam, we realize even more. It feels a bit like I feel like if I was a mother in Gaza and I didn't feel safe or my children were dying, I wouldn't care about the garbage left after a protest. I would want everyone to be like walking out from their life and stopping everything in their power, just being like, that's it. We're not doing this. But like
I don't
I
think
would
that's
want,
true.
because the minute I earn a dollar, my government in Canada and your government in the US they're going to take part of my dollar and buy weapons that are bombing children. And I just think we as the people really hire these politicians like who are making these decisions. If we all said, we're not doing this, we're all walking out, we're done, it'd be over. Like that's what it feels like to me the protest is.
So, okay, I actually think, I know you. I think you wouldn't be like that because I think humans aren't like that. I think that no matter how difficult the circumstances, you will always say, how are you? How are you doing? I feel like we can struggle and care at the same time.
Right.
I do think people, even in the worst of circumstances, even the worst of circumstances in our countries, can struggle and care because honestly, caring about other things makes your own personal struggle feel a little bit less, like when
True.
you're taking a bigger worldview.
True.
I think we can do both. I think it's so human to do both. That's why humans are freaking awesome. Like, think of all the things we care about every single day.
Yeah, there's this video that moved me so much this week, and that was uh this farmer and his friends going to the north of Gaza and distributing tiny seedlings of plants and being like, here, like this is the way we hold on to this land.
Yeah.
This is us saying we're not leaving. This is us being like, we're gonna grow food here. This is just starving people. Like this
Yeah.
tiny little seedling, like this takes a lot. I was like, because I had all these obstacles in my mind of gardening of like, oh my gosh, there's so many weeds. I have so much to do, blah, blah, blah. And then I watched this video and I was like, I'll be fine over here pulling a few weeds. I'm not trying to grow a garden in a cage being bombed. Yeah.
I think what I still think there's joy in gardening though, no matter where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. The people who were receiving the plants, and that's why it was so moving. I
It's
keep coming back to, I feel like the majority of Canadians, Americans, people in the UK, Australia, maybe they don't really know what life is like right now in Gaza for people. I don't, but maybe some people are choosing not to see what's actually happening.
I mean, I think, I'm only going to speak for Americans. We have wild amounts of privilege, but also wild amounts of class difference between the poorest of us and the richest of us. It's huge, staggeringly huge compared to other countries. I also feel like we don't have anything to compare it to except the stories that we are told about how bad things were. And those stories are often put where the worst of the worst, the most extreme examples are given. And we don't understand that there's also space for people to be human in hard times too. Like, I used to teach yoga at a domestic violence shelter, right? And the years that I did that, I couldn't really talk about it. It's the deal. If you go into domestic violence spaces, typically you can't talk about it because that makes the women and children there unsafe, et cetera, right? And people who'd want to donate to domestic violence shelters would donate like these big boxes and bags of stuff. And it would be like sheets that had holes in them and blankets that maybe weren't very nice. And the mentality is, well, people have nothing. These people have nothing, so I'll give them whatever it is. And there's like a dignity to allowing people to have standards and say, I don't want your sheets with holes in them. Like, and I think I also want to make sure that I personally don't get trapped in this idea that it's the saddest person in the room trap, so we're looking for the saddest person in the room and we're going to help the saddest person in the room because that makes us feel better. And when it just, I think it's a trap because nobody wants to be, as a person who's been in many trauma-informed spaces and been the saddest girl in the room when people have shared their history and their trauma, and I'm like number one all the time, it's a shitty place to be. Nobody wants to be number one of the saddest people in the world. Like, I don't.
Right. I know what you're saying about I remember going to a circle for parents of premature babies, feeling like I was the saddest person in the room. And it wasn't until I heard other people's stories where I was like, okay, I'm good. I don't even have to come back.
Yeah,
I'm sorry
yeah,
I even shared, and I'm grateful to all of you. Thank you. Bye.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. I don't know how to summarize that. Here's the other thing with difficult conversations is there's a lot that it spins around in our brains as humans.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think? What do you think that what would you say to the yoga teacher who's like, I really care about this. I see that this is a genocide happening. I see the apartheid, the ethnic cleansing, the horrific thing that is happening to people in Palestine. Or I see this other thing, and
Right.
I don't know if I want to show up on social media. And I do want to practice yoga off the mat. Like, what do where do we start to step in and do the hard work?
I think my answer to that person every time is head down, get to work. Get your head down and get to work on whatever it is you want to build. And that's true of like if you want to build a business or you want to build a yoga teaching career, or you want to affect change in your local government, or you want to affect change on a national or international scale. Like the answer is the same. Get your head down and get to work. It's going to be hard and you're going to feel so like I saw this one, like, when the Olympics were being shown and there's all these like inspirational memes about like how you get to be an Olympian, how you get to be following your dreams and do these amazing things. And most of them were like eye rolling sort of Tony Robbins kind of stuff.
Right.
There was one that was like, if you're doing what you truly are meant to be doing, that is your passion, that is what you want to do, about 30% of the time it feels great, 30% of the time it feels okay, and 30% of the time, or a third of the time, it feels bad. So I think the most important thing I can tell you is that sometimes it feels bad, no matter what it is. Like it'll feel bad sometimes, but get to work.
Right.
And get to work through the bad stuff. Because sometimes you'll get that euphoric high of like getting in a room with 30 other people who are standing outside doing a candlelight vigil, and you're like, oh my God, I don't have to explain myself to these people. Like, what a relief.
Yes.
In that moment, I'd be like, oh, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
But there's the other stuff too. There's the times where you're like, I feel mad, but I feel okay. It feels okay. Like, I feel like I'm still on the journey.
Right. Or this sucks. I
Yeah.
want to be blissfully ignorant again. Let's go back to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course. Of course. Like, look, it's not going to feel good all the time. Like, change doesn't feel good all the time. Also, as a business owner, I promise you, business ownership does not feel good all the time. The last time you and I reported a podcast, we were talking about trying to quit this stupid job because it doesn't feel good all the time. Like,
Yes.
it doesn't.
Oh gosh, it's always so good to hear from you and to talk to you and pick your brain about this. I'm going to have more to think on. I hope our listeners reach out if they have thoughts on this. And the other thing I want to say is around the consent, or maybe before the consent, especially if you're having these tough conversations with friends, is do check in with them.
Yeah.
I had someone reach out to me to say, this social justice yoga teacher, isn't saying enough right now. And I was like, just so you know, I'm friends with that person and they have some big stuff going on in their life. Please also know. And I have friends who have been speaking out about Palestine, and they're like, you know what? I have to take a complete break from social media. I'm like, you take care of you. And I have felt that way. So maybe start there. Maybe meet someone. Yeah.
Just say, as a person who has also had a lot going on in her life in the last 6 months or a year or so, 6 months for sure, I also beg of you to slide away from the narrative that anybody else you follow online owes you an explanation about their life. Please, 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 I beg of you to get away from that idea, that and for yourself too, that because I do think that also happens, is people in social justice spaces feel like they owe everybody else who follows them on social media an explanation about why they are or are not talking about a certain thing. You don't owe anybody anything. Again, may I reiterate, social media is not the cops. You don't owe people an explanation about your personal life. You just don't, because you can be a person too.
Right. So true. Also, let us know if you have this all figured out. We'd love to hear from you.
Figure this out for us. We'll have you on the podcast and just listen. Just listen to what you have to say.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for this, and for your friendship, and for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you. You're the greatest. I love our friendship. I love that we got to reconnect. Thank you for sending me that message on social media and your lovely voice on your voice memos that I'm never going to send again.
Do the voice memo. Let them be messy. Thank you for saying, because you're the first one that said, we should do a podcast about this. And I was like, this is why we're friends. Let's let everyone listen in on our mess.
Yeah, be messy in your yoga spaces too, but be messy with consent, and be messy with love, and be messy with grace.
Yeah, I agree. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Rebecca, for having this idea. As we were wrapping up our tough conversation, the one that wasn't recorded, but that we talked about in today's episode, I was sitting there thinking, this could be so beneficial if it was a podcast episode. And then Rebecca went ahead and said it. Hey, should we do a podcast on this? I think it's important. And I was talking about it with another yoga teacher this week, and she said, gosh, I wish that conversation was available right now. And so here it is. I'd love to hear from you, connected yoga teachers, if you are having tough conversations right now. If you're in the US, which a lot of our listeners are, you are coming up to a very tough election time. I don't know. Is this the worst one that I've seen yet? Oh gosh, am I paying attention more? I don't know. But it feels like it's a really stressful time, not just for our US friends, but also for everyone around the world. And As I was getting ready to record this podcast, I was checking in on what is happening around the world. And there was a really terrible bombing in Beirut, Lebanon today. Israel bombed there I heard between 6 and 10 blocks in a city, apartment buildings full of civilians and people. And I also heard that the U.S. just secured another $8.7 billion for weapons. And if there's one thing I know, is that the world right now does not need more weapons, harm, and violence. Imagine what $8.7 billion could do for the people suffering right now in the U.S., for mental health programs, for schools, for healthcare. Imagine if the U.S. invested in and created a system where everyone could access healthcare. You know, we can have tough conversations and it can be part of the yoga world. I also want to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, Naomi, who recently wrote an article or an essay, whatever you want to call it, about does politics belong in yoga? And so many people responded right away to her question on that, like, no way, it doesn't belong in yoga. And we've had many conversations here on the podcast where, you know, everything is political, including yoga. That doesn't mean that we're standing at the front and giving a sermon on politics and history and who to vote for and opinions. I get that. But I asked Naomi to consider, what if we change the wording and instead of calling it politics, we call it social justice? So are you okay with your yoga teacher talking about social justice, about collective liberation, about collective care, about everyone on the earth having equal rights and caring for the planet and the trees and the plants and the animals that are here with us? Are we okay with that conversation being part of yoga? And if we're not, are we actually doing yoga? If we look at yoga philosophy, how does it talk about social justice? And so thank you so much to Naomi for quoting me in the article. I'll try and link to it in our show notes as well. It's a really nuanced conversation, and many of these conversations are. And the one thing I know, connected yoga teachers, is that speaking up makes a difference. Writing poetry makes a difference. Writing a grant makes a difference. And I'm really, really certain that what is happening to someone across the globe from us does matter. And what's happening in our own small communities also matters. And I'm very passionate about peaceful protests, direct action, speaking up where we can, and also doing things in our own communities. So you are going to know how you can show up to care for those around you, because really, otherwise, what the heck's the point? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. You can share it directly in the comments if you want your name to be there. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/382. You can leave comments there. You could leave an anonymous comment in our Facebook group. If you're like, I just don't want people attacking me in there, but I really want to say this thing about the podcast episode. So you can find that over at theconnectedyogateacher.com and you can join the group. You can also leave me a voice message if you feel like you want to share your voice with me or with the entire podcast. We'll see if we can get those on, because really this is an ongoing conversation. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this today and then going forward. You know, what tough conversations are you having? I'm taking a big pause here and a big breath because I feel like there's been a lot of tough conversations in my world this year, and ones where I had to really get still. I find I can do that when I'm outside in nature. I took the most amazing walk today, and it was because I was really listening to what was happening outside and really noticing and looking around and soaking in fall and trying my best to just be right in that moment in nature and not be thinking about like, okay, I have to get the podcast done and then and I have all these work things. I was really trying to be right in that moment And then really also in that moment thinking, how can I show up and serve the earth as well? Not just like soak it in and have this one-way relationship, but really, how can I show up for the earth? That's a question I ask a lot when I'm outside walking now, thanks to the interview that we did with Tracy Stanley, which I will reference again and again because it made a big impact on me. Okay, all of the links are in the show notes, theconnectedyogateacher.com/381. And one big thing, because Rebecca Sebastian talked about doing a book club, I wanted to tell you about a book club that is like the easiest one ever to do. It's a Instagram chat. It's really low key in there. There's no set schedule for reading a book. It's called Book Club for Free Palestine. I'll link to it in the show notes. And I want to give a shout out of thank you. This week, Audrey shared a message in there from Palestia. So it's a video. Many of you might know Palestia because she fled Gaza. She was an Instagram influencer. She became a journalist. She's a young person. And she wrote a book called Eyes of Gaza, which you can now pre-order. And she wrote this post as she shared the news about her book. And I just want to read you her words. She said, "Life is funny. Today, the Lebanese sky above me is in flames. Today is also the announcement day of my book, Eyes of Gaza, which I started writing way back in October 2023. Or as I knew it, week 1. I thought I was documenting the greatest horrors I would ever feel. I felt that by the time I published this journal, maybe, just maybe, Gaza would finally be safe and the world would learn from what happened to us. That is not my feeling now. I do not feel that those weeks are behind us. In this close exile to the ruins of my homeland, I don't feel that I'm in week 50 either. I feel that I am in week 1. So I want to leave you with this, Connected Yoga Teachers. Imagine fleeing Gaza and making it safely to Lebanon, only to start watching innocent civilians again being the target of violence, and you're there now. I'm not going to lie, a lot can be happening in our own personal lives. I know that, and you might be dealing with lots of things that are really capturing your attention and thinking like, oh gosh, can I even look at this? I've been off social media for a good week or 2 now as I'm recording this, but I still go in and check with our book club. I like to check in what's happening with the news. And I want to let you know that as much as sometimes we need to take a break, I feel like it's a really important time in the world where we do have to be watching what's happening. And if you're feeling like, well, I can't take much on, this book club is one thing that you could decide to do. We read a book about Palestine or another community or place that isn't free. We share book suggestions in there. It's just a chat. We definitely don't type much in there. We are busy reading more than chatting. And I just know that art and information are really powerful for change. So maybe you're writing right now and that's your way of like working for collective liberation. Or maybe you're reading and that really helps to connect us to other stories from people from around the world. Oh my gosh, Connected Yoga Teachers. I haven't been doing solo episodes because I feel like I'm doing all of my chit chat on the intro, outro for these episodes for you. If you have a topic that you're like, Shannon, can you cover this next? Or here's something that I'm dealing with as a yoga teacher, let me know. I've got some ideas brewing of how we can hang out together a little bit more. And as I sign off here today, I want to thank you, dear listener, for making this podcast possible, for listening all the way to the end. I don't know what the special prize is. My question at the end might be the special prize. I also want to thank our team over here, Suzanne Crunch and Sinead, for supporting me, supporting the podcast, and supporting our amazing community of yoga teachers and podcast listeners. And as usual, the question that I'm going to leave you with is, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.